So let's look at boundaries in a little bit more detail. A boundary is a way that we can specify network segments and then associate them with particular elements of our config manager environment. For instance, a distribution point. We could create a boundary for a branch office location, let's say my office in Houston, that doesn't have particularly good bandwidth back to the main office. We define the boundary by defining the subnets that are in that location. And then we ultimately associate that with a distribution point, as an example, a distribution point that we place in Houston. And we can call that a protected distribution point, so only devices that are in Houston within those boundaries, and we know they're in those boundaries because they have an IP address that falls within that range. Only those computers can get their software downloads and other elements from that particular distribution point. So we're directing the traffic by using these network boundaries. So let's go ahead and draw this in here. Remember that in our main office we have our primary site server and we have the primary database. Now, associated with that are going to be our management points, and we may have several distribution points. The distribution points are where the clients do their heavy lifting, right? They're going to connect to the distribution points, really any one of these that have been designated for them, and download the large application packages when they have to install a package that's been deployed to them. Or we also have operating system images that go out to these distribution points as a part of an OS deployment. Those can be quite large. So there's a number of different elements that are at play here. Now, in our main office, the network is going to be a high-speed local area network. So all of these clients in the main office can connect to those distribution points without any trouble. However, we want to make sure that across a WAN connection, right, which is the wide area network connection, to a branch location like my office in Houston, we're going to have client machines there as well. These will be Windows 7 clients. They could even be server clients. Depends on how many computer systems and what type of computer systems we have at that location. Usually it's just client machines, and the majority of their servers exist back at the main data center, but it just sort of depends. Now, because the WAN bandwidth here is not particularly strong, we may want to make sure that these clients download and do their heavy lifting from a localized distribution point. So we would deploy one, which would be a server, to that location. Now you can actually take a client operating system and turn it into a distribution point. So if there was a desktop system that was always on at that location, we could actually turn that into a distribution point if we wanted to. And in doing so, we're not deploying any additional server hardware, but we create a boundary. The boundary first is a range of subnets. So let's say in Houston I have a subnet of 192.168.10.1 as well as 20.1. I have two subnets in Houston. Both of those subnets exist at that location, and our clients can be on either one of those two subnets. Well, what we do back at the primary office through our console is we configure a boundary for each of these. So the boundary will be the subnet, and we'll associate that and give it a name and call it Houston Boundary 1 or something to that effect. We'll create another boundary that includes this subnet, the 20.1 subnet. Now I've essentially defined a boundary and associated it with a subnet or multiple subnets. I can create multiple boundaries. I can create boundaries of a number of different types as well. And then I have to create a boundary group. So I create a boundary group by bringing these boundaries together, and I would probably name it like the Houston boundary group. So I'm bringing them together, sort of binding them together into a group so that now I can use that group. Well, now when I go to the distribution point that I'm planning to put in Houston, when I configure it, I can associate the Houston boundary group with that particular distribution point, so that all machines, regardless of whether it's a traveling laptop, maybe your machine is usually back at the main office, you just happen to be visiting Houston, or whether it's a machine that normally lives in Houston, it will recognize, the entire system will recognize that no, anybody who has one of those two IP addresses or an IP address from one of those two subnets must connect to this distribution group. Now we have ways of overriding that. We have ways of making it more required in certain sites than in other sites. We can also make it a protected distribution point based on those boundaries so that nobody from the main office, like this client right here, we don't want him accidentally connecting across the WAN to this distribution point. So if we make it protected, then not only are we getting clients from the Houston office connecting to their proper distribution point, we're also making sure that clients at the main office don't accidentally get directed to that distribution point. We're protecting our WAN bandwidth. Now, one other usage for these boundaries is site assignment. It only happens the first time you take a client and join it into a site. This Houston boundary and boundary group can be associated with the site that would be its closest primary site. Let's say the site is called North America. Now I'm a part of Houston and I want to be using this distribution point right here, but I want to make sure the clients get assigned to the Houston primary site and they're associated with that site. So the boundaries can be used as a part of automatic site assignment. So there's a number of different usages for these types of, or this type of configuration.